So, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from Group 9. Today, I'm going to peel the topic about the what role do alliances play in US deterrence strategy? How can the US better incorporate alliance into deterrence operation? So, now we are from Group 6. We'll tell you guys about this topic and let's move to the first slide, which is we tell you about the introduction about this topic that we see. So from this introduction, the US Department of Defense, the OD on 2018 National Defense Strategy state that a more lethal, resilient and rapidly innovating joint force combined with a robust constellation of allies and partner will sustain American influence and ensure favorable balance of power that safeguard the free and open international order. So from this, we can know that these allied countries were interested in becoming allies to the United States because of their military strength, owned by the United States, and the sustained growth of the US economy after the Cold War, like North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO, Canada, and Western Europe. The benefit they get when they become an American ally, US provided with indispensable diplomatic, economic, and military support totaling more than $115 American. So let we see the second slide. So from this second slide, we can see about the trends in United States. We'll tell you guys about potential US opponents have concluded the upgrading and diversifying their nuclear capabilities is critical to their defensive posture and success, whether at the negotiations table, on the battlefields, or in future crises with the US. So from this, we will tell you guys more about these trends in the third slide. Let's we see what we have in the third slide. So from the third slide, during the Cold War, deterrence was frequently used to refer to nuclear deterrence, with US nuclear forces playing a central part in US deterrence measure. Nuclear deterrence, however, fell into the background of US national security policy, defense strategy, and military operation following the demise of the Soviet Union. Nuclear forces looked to play a marginal and declining role for many policymakers in the 1990 and 20. Nuclear deterrence and nuclear capable forces become increasingly linked with deterring a restricted set of narrowly defined, highly unlikely scenario involving nuclear or other weapons of mass destruction assault against the US or allied homelands. So, however, as noted in the 2018 nuclear and nuclear armed potential enemies have not followed the United States in diminishing the role and relevance of nuclear forces. In recent years, North Korea, Russia, and China appear to have surveyed the geopolitical environment, assessed the prospect of future armed conflict with the United States and its allies, and fundamentally rejected the premise that nuclear forces are fading from geopolitical prominence or declining in military utility. These possible enemies appear determined to developing and implementing tactics and plans for their nuclear-capable delivery system that will give their leaders with a variety of use or employment options across the spectrum of crisis and conflict. These hybrid plans mix conventional and unconventional weapons, with nuclear-capable forces playing a substantial and expanding role. Such choices are most likely designed to complement and assist deterrence and other military political goals by actively modifying and complicating the decision-making and defense planning of potential adversaries, particularly the United States and worldwide alliance. This is especially important in light of future confrontation inside their own region. So that's all from me. I will give to tell about guys about this topic to my friend, which is from Muhammad Adam bin Afiq Wong.
So we're going to continue to the next slide, which is the advantages of the deterrence. Well, there are many advantages that we can get from deterrence in United States. First of all, deterrence is a very useful component of national security policy in at least two respects. It is a way to avoid highly damaging outcomes without having to disarm or disable an adversary, which often will be exceedingly painful and costly to do. It is a way to protect interests that may be difficult or even impossible to defend if an undeterred adversary ever were to attack those interests. Deterrence can be beneficial to the US even when it is not one of the parties to a deterrent relationship, and even when those being deterred are ostensibly friends and allies as well as adversary. Next, deterrence has a wide range of application, but it is important even in national security problems. It is sometimes overlooked the premise that terrorists cannot be discouraged as being present in most of the discussion about international terrorism. Triumphalist American ideology devoted greater attention to conception of hegemony than to the fine nuisance of deterrence, freed from the balance of terror and the need to share superpower space with the other state. The other reason for denial of this deterrence important is the belief that regime we consider adversary don't think like the rest of us. This is an example of believing one's own propaganda, in this case speech aimed to maintain enmity toward an adversary by portraying him as more extreme or fanatical than ourselves and hence unaffected by deterrence. The thinking disregarded the alternative potential of allowing a combination of competition and collaboration with Moscow to play out more freely while repelling the worst thing that Russia would try to inflict on Western interests more readily than an ATO could during most of the original Cold War. So in the East Asia Pacific region, most of the debate of competition with China is couched in terms of dwelling hegemonies, along with the failing to fully explore how deterrence can prevent the worst outcome where the United States and China interests are clearly odds. US policy has paid unfortunate attention to opportunity for mutually beneficial cooperation on other levels, such as the China's created Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank or China Belt and Road Initiative. So that is for advantages of deterrence in United States. So next we're going to move on to the disadvantages of deterrence.
Okay, now I'm going to talk about disadvantages of deterrence. In general, punishment is expected to have one of two effects on deterrence. For starters, by increasing the certainty of punishment, potential offenders may be deterred by the fear of being apprehended. For example, if the number of state troopers patrolling highways increases on a holiday weekend, some drivers may reduce their speed to avoid receiving a ticket. Second, if potential offenders weigh the consequences of their actions and conclude the risk of punishments are too great, the severity of punishment may influence behavior. This is part of the reasoning behind three strikes and truth in sentencing policies, which use the threat of extremely harsh sentences to deter some people from engaging in criminal behaviors. Next, one flaw in deterrence theory is that it assumes human beings are rational actors who consider the consequences of their actions before committing a crime. However, this is not always the case. Half of the state prisoners, for example, were under the influence of drugs or alcohol at the time of their offense. Next, consider the dynamic of criminal justice system to gain a better understanding of why deterrence is less effective than a commonly assumed. For people will commit a crime if there was 100% certainty of being apprehended. However, because of the majority of crimes, even serious ones, do not result in an arrest and conviction, the overall deterrent effect of the certainty punishment is significantly reduced. Clearly, increasing the severity of punishment will have little effect on people who do not believe they will be held accountable for their actions. Next, we move on to the next slide. On the value of harsher sentences in reducing crime, economists frequently reach different conclusions than criminologists. While criminologists view various legal threats as the result of complex and unpredictable process, economists approach the issues from a rational choice perspective, which considers the risk and benefits of the criminal behavior. Sanctions merely represent the expected price of criminal behavior. Another issue with assessing deterrence is that in order for sanctions to deter, potential offenders must be aware of sanctions risks and consequences before committing an offense. In this regard, research shows that the general public tends to underestimate the severity of generally imposed sanctions. This is unsurprisingly given that the general public is frequently unaware of specifics of sentence policies. Potential offenders are also unlikely to be aware of changes in sentence policies, which reduces any deterrent effect. The lack of such data on punishment risk awareness make it difficult to draw conclusions about the deterrent effect of sanctions level and prospects. Next, I pass to my friend ZAKRI to explain about the conclusion.
Okay, for the conclusion, in a nutshell, there are both advantages and disadvantages in US deterrence strategies. All of those properties that we have shot out shows us how can the US better incorporate allies into deterrent operations. Moreover, it is explained that lengthy range nuclear deterrence has a long and largely effective track record. However, the majority of that history was written during the Cold War under strategic conditions that have since changed dramatically. The fall of the Soviet Union, the rise of other nuclear armed states, the proliferation of nuclear threats, the reorganization of alliance, and continued downward pressure on nuclear weapons and force levels all suggest that extended deterrence must operate in new and challenging circumstances to be effective. Despite the changed strategic environment, prolonged deterrence remains a key component of US security policy. The Obama administration has acknowledged its enduring significance through remarks from high officials such as the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, and the President himself. Simultaneously, as the scale of nuclear weapons supplying the extended deterrence shrinks, the number of governments seeking or acquiring the protection given by the extended deterrent may rise. The various criteria of extended deterrence and assurance must be taken into account when determining the optimum size and makeup of the US nuclear arsenal. Next, I will pass to Kishendran.
So for the conclusion part, given the advent of new threats, varying regional securities conditions and the ongoing problems of relying on nuclear weapons for deterrence, it is impossible to predict a static level of nuclear forces capable of completing all critical duties at the same time. However, it appears that US nuclear force cutbacks will make completing this task more difficult. As a result, future choices about the number and composition of US nuclear force should be based on extensive consultation with friends and allies whose security is dependent on the US nuclear deterrence survivability. Incorporating allies into the official consultation process on these matters may also provide some confidence. Without such dialogues, US measure aimed at bolstering deterrence may wind up hastening its collapse. The ramification might be unparalleled and terrible for everyone. Overall, there is many lessons that we have learned from this topic. The major ones are we should always learn from the good values that we have learned from the US deterrence strategies. This knowledge is still something beneficial for the politics and war strategies that we could use till date. We should also know the importance of the US deterrence strategy so that we know the advantages and disadvantages of it. And we also should not misuse the strategies of US deterrence for our self-importance. So in the end, this is a quote said by Atal Bihari. Our nuclear weapons are meant purely as deterrent against nuclear adventure. By N. adversary. Thank you from Group 9.